President Trump is dealing with many legal battles in order to try to make America great again. To help me go through this, I have the brilliant legal mind of Judge Joe Brown. Judge Joe Brown, thank you for joining me again.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well. I saw this happen just not very long ago. President Trump signed an executive order ordering those who challenge his policies to financially be liable if they lose the case. So basically, all of these groups are suing his executive orders, but then when they lose, the government is stuck with that. And he's saying a lot of these are false, fraudulent lawsuits. And if the people had to pay for them themselves, they wouldn't sue the government as much. What are your thoughts on this new executive order?
Well, that's not too far afield from how it works right now. Usually, if your lawsuit is frivolous, you wind up getting stuck with the cost. I guess what this is just sort of publishing it. That's the general rule in court in the first place. So, I mean, that's nothing out of the ordinary. It discourages frivolous lawsuits. And when you have federal litigation, one of the things that they have is amount in controversy. In other words, if it's not important enough or there's not enough money involved in the case, then the feds don't have the jurisdiction to hear it. The other thing that comes up in a lot of these is standing to sue. The government generally, except when it comes to another internal government structure, is immune from lawsuit because of a principle known as sovereign immunity. That would be anywhere from municipalities, counties, states on up to the federal levels, unless they allow it. So that's one burden that is not being met. And I'm also intrigued by the fact that at the last count, there's 75 or so executive orders, which is a heavy load, and they appear to have been prepared over the intervening years when he was not in office in anticipation of a win. And the thing that is striking me is that there are so few responses. I think that tactically he's kind of overwhelmed the other side and they don't know where to put their resources because there are a limited number of lawyers that are available to take these things on who have the competence or familiarity with the federal system to be able to do so. And that level is dropping lower and lower today because of the fact that we paradoxically have too many lawyers, and too many of them are not really prepared, qualified lawyers because they have done the equivalent of a medical student passing medical school, but not yet having completed his or her internship and residency. So they're amateurs, and we've got too many judges on the bench who, some I'm familiar with, have never had a trial as a lawyer, never had a case or a client or 4 or 5 trials as a lawyer, and that certainly doesn't prepare you for what you require to sit on the bench and adjudicate litigation, let alone at the earlier level go in and litigate. So we need to do something about that as a profession, but I'm surprised that there are so few responses at this time. And some of them I know from looking at them, there is no expectation of prevailing, but simply opening dialogue. And some of them are blueprints for further litigation, not litigation, but legislation to address some of the issues that are being raised. So I'm surprised at the Democratic Party's rather lame, petulant response to most of this. And the other thing is why is anybody talking about excess cost that should not be there or saving money? And the thing about a bureaucracy, which is essentially the United States government, which has gotten enormous over the decades, is that when you start digging, it's like an archaeological site. You start finding stuff down there that has been forgotten. Maybe there are rumors about it, and it needs to be uncovered because some of it is essentially, not literally, but figuratively radioactive, and you still feel the effects. You have people getting money who have been long dead. You have situations where agencies are funded and they haven't had anything to do for a long time, and you don't know where the employees are for the agency, and they have moved on to other ones, but there are funds there, and these are not black ops type things that might be associated with the military, where there is some legitimate need to conceal the expense from prying foreign eyes. But that's not the case here. It's just mismanagement, waste, and structure built on top of until no one knows where the foundations are.
Okay. From other guests connected to Trump's inner circle that have been on my show, they let me know that they had dozens and dozens of executive orders, and the plan was to strike immediately within 30 days, overwhelm the system, so that because they felt like if they trickled them out, they would be challenged, and he would be hamstrung in his first 2 years. To me, it seems like they dropped about 4 years worth of executive orders in about 14 days.
Well, I've always said that when you assess what a president is going to be about, look at how many executive orders and or items of proposed legislation that come out of that office. They know they're going to be sworn in, and they have several months in the transitions to prepare for this. And generally, the executives that do things for the country have a lot of proposed law that they want to get passed, and you see coming out of these offices or the presidential suite when we have a new president or a returned office for another term. You have legislation commensurate with the hustle of the president, so to speak. And I don't mean that as a negative hustle. I just mean work ethic of the president. Certain ones I said were going to be a poor president. They turned out to be, because in their first weeks in office, they had no proposed legislation and few executive orders, because what is going on is they are agenda driven, social agenda driven, which is a mind game thing rather than something that actually deals with the nuts and bolts of administering a large and great country for the benefit of the constituency.
Okay. Let me switch gears with you. This morning, I read that Hunter Biden is petitioning the court on a lawsuit he brought against a journalist that exposed his left behind laptops. The former president's son is saying, I've run out of money. I have no income. I can't even fight this lawsuit that I brought anymore. I'm behind on legal bills. Can he legally drop that? And could that citizen countersue him for wasting his money in time in a lawsuit that he couldn't even finish?
Yes. And see, his problem, Hunter Biden's, is that the case that deals with his situation is New York Times versus Sullivan, a 1962 U.S. Supreme Court case, and Biden doesn't have a leg to stand on. And I have read the downloads from the 3 laptops, and they're pretty damning, and he really needs to go hide in a hole, because bringing attention to this is not going to be with friendly Dada's successor, Ms. Harris, Imhoff, in office, but somebody who is trying to rectify a horrible situation that developed where we were drifting too far to fascism, which is revealed in those laptops very, very, very much in detail. And he's likely to wind up doing the same thing Fani Willis did down in Georgia, which is talk her way into a lot of self-incrimination and exposure of wrongdoing that's going to wind up getting her and a lot of other people facing jail time. So he's incriminating himself every time he does something that brings these laptops to the fore. And I don't have any problems with him doing it. I like to see dumb crooks, and he's one of them. So bring it on. It ought to be fascinating and very illuminating to a lot of the American public that did not get what I used to get in the 5th and 6th grade in elementary school, that now seems to be in an 8th, maybe even to a college education. So maybe they need to get their little pipe dreams ended so they don't get on that pipe like Hunter. And
yeah. This story has been so interesting to cover over the last 5 years, because it went from Russian disinformation to the intelligence apparatus saying it was fake, to the sitting president saying it was a lie and a fake, to, okay, it's true, but his property shouldn't have been taken, to it's absolutely true, and now I can't afford to defend it anymore. It's like it's come full circle. This laptop has been so fascinating.
The three of them never should have been around, because on them there are emails between Hillary Clinton and himself, his daddy, and other people, and Harris lately. Well, not so much Harris, but some other people that are very incriminating. And there are even White House tapes. And the idea that these sensitive tapes coming out of the White House wind up on the laptop of a crackhead are just astonishing in terms of lapses of judgment. And some of those laptop exposures just on their own established probable cause that crime was committed. One thing that is astonishing, nobody has gone after Hunter Biden and the people that he implicates through these laptops with FARA violations, Foreign Agent Registration Act violations. And it is pretty clear that that's going on. And there's some damning conversations that are recorded, not just with the audio, but with the visual as well, as to transactions that occurred between Hunter Biden, his father, Joe Biden, and then President Barack Obama, and foreign entities in the White House. And I think the American public needs to be made privy to that. And that's one of the things I think that needs to be brought to light.
The person he was suing, a gentleman named Garrett, mailed me a paper copy of the 3 laptops. I had to throw it away. I was afraid my children would find the book and go through it. Just all of the disgusting things that were inside of it. I couldn't believe what was on that laptop.
Yeah, Hunter Biden on the laptops had some interesting discussions about his personal conceptualization of himself as a porn star. And some of the participants in some of his acts are the children, relatives, or close associates of some of the people that we hear about all of the time in the political sphere. So you wonder about things. And also some of them were minors at the time, which, considering the uproar that we've heard about that with certain other individuals, I'm surprised that those actually evidence, not even expose, but actual evidence, because there you are looking at it, and unless somebody can show that this is artificially intelligent driven creations,
artificially driven Russian.
Damning things on those tapes. Some pretty damning things, but that's just the salacious stuff. The more important things are the revelations of this governmental wrongdoing on a high level. that thing about the black box behind the vet in the garage and the documents that were discovered there that I believe it was the special prosecutor that said we are declining to go after Joe Biden because of his senility, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those are very compromising to the American security scene. And the thing of it is unlike the situation with Mar-a-Lago and Trump's clear power and authority to classify or declassify, considering his position, the vice president does not have those positions. And we have an absolute, clear, concrete revelation and establishment of criminal activity by a vice president of the United States of America in collaboration with foreign agents, specifically those from the People's Republic of China, through the aegis of his son, Hunter Biden. And it's all laid out very clearly with emails and visual and auditory evidence to sustain what you would need to establish probable cause. And I'm just surprised that that's been overlooked. Well, I'm not surprised. Let's just say it's a disgrace that it has been.
Okay. Let's go back to what's happened with the Supreme Court in the last day or so. The Supreme Court ruled against President Trump as the chief executive of the country, saying that he must pay out USAID money, even if it's to fraudulent or questionable groups. Justice Alito said a lower court shouldn't be able to run the country and override a sitting president. He said, essentially, the other judges just stuck the American people with a $2 billion penalty by forcing this money to be spent. What are your thoughts on the Supreme Court ruling against Trump and his authority over USAID funds?
Well, what's going on is you have Article 3 courts getting involved in the mix. The only court that is set up by a constitutional edict is the Supreme Court of the United States. But in Article 3, the Constitution grants Congress the authority to set up such lesser courts as are necessary. They sort of feed into the Supreme Court, and they are a vetting instrument. So we have the district courts, and then we have the circuit courts of appeals, and then we have the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, it's not saying that what's happened in a lower court might not be struck down by a district court or a circuit court, rather. So we don't know. There are step-by-step things that have to go through. So it's not saying that the U.S. Supreme Court necessarily approves of this in totality. It's just as it was presented to them from the Trump administration's request to get a stay on the lower court's ruling. They're simply saying we're not going to stay it, but that doesn't mean that all of the money would be paid out by the time it works its way up. And for those who don't get it, some of us are strong supporters of the Second Amendment and thought, say, Biden's unconstitutional edicts and relative to gun control and ATF dealing with such things as just suddenly reversing course and banning pistols with braces, which are set up for handicapped folk, disabled veterans and the like. We thought that was unconstitutional, and we applauded a Texas district court judge, federal district court judge, for saying, no, you can't do that, and putting a stay on it. And that's the other side of the sword. So if you want to say good for the judge in Texas to make the Constitution paramount in terms of the Second Amendment, then that has collateral consequences. It spills over into other things. But relative to that, it looks like the Trump administration has just abandoned the Biden administration's appeal of that ruling. So it looks like it'll stick. So we have collateral consequences for things that are important to us. It's like you drive 65, 70 miles an hour on a freeway or an expressway. We are not going to abandon the convenience of that type of transport that is available to us. But as a collateral consequence, there is maiming, mutilation, and death that comes from a moment's inattention as a collateral consequence of this great benefit we have with personal transportation. So it's the same kind of thing with the Constitution and the laws that we have. There are benefits, and then there are unintended sometimes, but unavoidable collateral consequences. And we just have to say these things are worth putting up with the consequences. So this thing with Article 3 courts that vet what gets to the U.S. Supreme Court so it's not completely overloaded, that's been going on for a long, long time. So it's just part of the landscape of what happens in the United States with the separation of powers. The legislative body to make the law, the executive branch headed by the president to enforce the law, and the judicial branch to interpret and decide the application of the law. So it's what we do.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you for your insight on that. Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey has asked the Department of Justice to open an investigation into whether President Biden had cognitive mental decline, which allowed unelected officials to drive his policies and his approvals. They're saying that if they're able to prove this, they might be able to unravel a former president's executive orders and pardons because they would be unconstitutional and void based on his mental capabilities. Any thoughts on that lawsuit?
That's not going anywhere.
Okay.
We have a long-standing principle that goes back a long, long way. If the ceremony and the formalities were adhered to, then it's done. So you can't go back, say, and establish that 2 years and 17 days ago, this person was in fact infirm and incapable of doing something just because he's that way now. There's no way you can establish that at the moment of the event, the thing happened. So there was no contemporary challenge. And that's caught up with the same logic as to why we have no ex post facto laws, no bills of attainder, which in other words, you do something now, it's perfectly all right. Somebody can't penalize you in the future for retroactively making what you did wrong. Same thing with the decisions. Most commonly, this comes up, believe it or not, when it comes to a matter of marriage. A couple gets married and the preacher is a jackleg preacher. He's been called and they think he's legit, but he's never been officially ordained. He performs a marriage ceremony and years later somebody wants to attack it. Well, they can't, because what winds up happening was the ceremony apparent at the time, that people take it as a legitimate situation. Well, that's it. It's done. So too late to talk about it now.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you for that. I wondered if that was, maybe a way of getting back at some of the people he pardoned that people didn't like, or whether that had something to do with executive orders. But I didn't know where that one would go, so that's why I wanted to get your mind on it.
Well, the person that really crystallized what pardons were about was Abraham Lincoln. He was trying to reconcile the South and the North toward the end of the Civil War. And what the pardon power is about is that the people who drafted the Constitution were aware of the fact that there might be some of these Article 3 lower courts that might decide that they were going to go after somebody and put them in a compromised situation. But then as a big picture, justice would require that somebody be pardoned. So essentially, there are three things that a president is unanswerable for. One is his pardoning power, and two, it comes from his status as commander-in-chief of the armed services and as his status as chief diplomat of the country. That came to the fore with what was going to wind up with that Mar-a-Lago thing and Smith, because the Supreme Court has held that through the authority he gets, he has unlimited discretion and authority to classify or declassify any document. His generals may want to declassify something. The president can say, no, it stays classified. They may want to keep something classified, but as chief diplomat, he may be negotiating with an ambassador for France and saying, hey, look, this is top secret, but we have this information you need to know. So he has this absolute authority in some fields that cannot be a question. He doesn't have to give reasons for it. It's just him, because basically all information sources coming through the military, the CIA, NSA, all of this feed in so that the commander-in-chief can be properly advised as to the circumstances. There may be valid reasons for the man at the top not letting anybody else know what's going on because it's too sensitive. Same thing when it comes to diplomacy. So the same thing when it comes to pardon. There may be some overweening and very important reasons for the pardon that do not need to be made public for national security reasons or for any other reason. So he's been granted that authority, and it's 236 years since that was granted to the president. So it's a little late to start squawking about it.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the difficulty of releasing these Jeffrey Epstein files? Many Americans would like to know who was involved, what really happened. Is he an agent of Mossad Israel? Was he CIA? They want to get to the bottom of the Jeffrey Epstein mystery, but now it seems even the Attorney General can't get the proper documentation. There seems to be a cover-up in New York. Your thoughts on all of that?
Well, you just gave the essence of it, and very few people realize it. People have inquiring minds. That used to be from the National Enquirer. Inquiring minds want to know. See, it's a gossip matter more than a national security one at this point. Somebody needs to get through it and ferret it out, but everybody wants to know. And what's happened, though, this is one of the biggest changes I've noticed in the American public. From 40 years ago, what used to be on the last column on the last page of the last section, the gossip column, is now front page stuff because we've morphed into a tabloid journalistic mode for mainstream media, with a few exceptions like Wall Street Journal. So basically, that's people who just want to know some juicy gossip more so than it is a national security problem. But that's an unpopular opinion. So it's there, and when people spend the time to dig through it, because it's obviously going to be tedious correlating who was there, when he was there or she was there, and what was going on and what happened, what did they know. And then see, I know from being a celebrity, people walk up all the time and want to take a picture. You don't know who they are, but you're just being kind to your public, so you shake hands, or they want to put their arm around you and you smile, politely into the camera, and they could probably show the picture 10 years later and say, he was complicit with this guy who had this so-and-so. So you don't know. So there's a lot there that needs to be sifted through, and it'll take a lot of time. And quite frankly, at this point, there are a lot more pressing issues that these people who are in place to do these things need to be paying attention to.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I
want to dovetail with something else. What's going on with this Diddy thing?
Okay.
You noticed that Homeland Security got involved in this whole thing instead of the FBI. Diddy got three counts, indictment counts, charging him with Mann Act violations. The FBI was essentially formed as it is now to get Mann Act considerations into law. They wanted Jack Johnson, a former world heavyweight boxing champion. He was black and he had a white wife. And some people objected to him traveling across state lines with his wife. So the act says it is illegal to transport females across state lines for illicit purposes. That's the FBI. Why did the FBI not be the principal agency serving the search warrants in California and in Florida? Why was it Homeland Security? Well, when you get Homeland Security, there's some little known verbiage deep inside their statutes created, Patriot Act, etc., that allows someone, a federal judge, to set up bond and detention circumstances so the person is held effectively incommunicado, because when Homeland Security is involved as a prosecutorial entity, then you can do these restrictions you otherwise could not do for so-called national security. Now, why is that important here? For the same reasons you have the Epstein matter. Well, what Diddy was probably doing is what everybody who is a star in Hollywood or around and about the entertainment industry does. They set up a power base that is based on, hey, I know some things that you know I know, and you bet not try to do anything rank to me because I'll bring out what's rank about you. So he's got 15 years worth of blackmail recordations, audio, visual, and considering some of the people who were at risk, I have a sneaking suspicion that what happened to him was a result of an attempt to keep some of the, shall we say, excessive exuberance of certain people in the national light from coming to the fore. Remember, you go back 15 years, and that's not a good thing. And the whole situation is screwed. He was offering to post a $50 million bond with sureties. He had already surrendered his passport before he turned up to surrender himself on the charges, or though they went and got him, which was foul since he had agreed to come in. He got himself a place in New York, which was foreign to the happenstances, which occurred in Florida and California, not New York. So that kind of somebody who, by the way, came back from an island where he was staying that had no extradition agreement with the U.S. government. So that's not somebody you say, okay, he needs to be held in the incarcerated, incommunicado until this matter is resolved, because I dealt with a lot of these kind of cases years and years ago. I represented a number of pimps and prostitutes in the Memphis area, and they'd always hit them with the Mann Act, the same thing they hit Diddy with. We'd go down and post a $250 bond for, this guy, and that's it. And we show up and resolve the matter. So $250 for 4 or 5 counts of Mann Act violations against an ordinary pimp becomes $50 million is insufficient against somebody who just may have some blackmail information on somebody who's being protected. It just doesn't fit justice.
Okay. Do you think the curiosity around Diddy is the same as Jeffrey Epstein, where they're like, we just want to know the A-list celebrities that were involved, if there was any politicians involved?
Well, no, undoubtedly. We have gotten fixed on gossip. We've gotten fixed on tabloid journalism. We were addicted to soap operas, and I'm glad to be part of this genre that is now evaporated of TV judge shows, which destroyed soap operas. because people wanted to know not only salacious things, which piqued their curiosity, but they wanted to know what proper resolution was instead of just going on and on and on about somebody doing what was quite blatantly morally wrong, if not legally wrong, and there was no resolution. So that has happened. And now the urge of Hollywood has come back. So instead of having actual TV judges, for the most part, all of those on the genre were not actual judges. Some were just auditioned for the part. We have people 2-3 years out of law school who look attractive that don't know what they're doing. We have people that have never even been involved in the law field who have had court TV shows. So it's just becoming ludicrous in terms of what Hollywood does. But it's just this kind of thing that we get where we have inquiring minds and we just want to know.
Yeah. Well, that's actually really insightful because, you know, there's so many rumors around the Jeffrey Epstein, and in the absence of evidence or proof, the human mind starts to build stories. And even I'm like, okay, I just want to know who was involved, you know, and like, I don't believe anything's going to happen. I don't think any further justice. The guy's dead. You know, but I guess you're right that my mind just wants to know who was involved.
And we might need to know, because I think some of the reasons that this situation has been treated like it is, instead of the tabloid journalistic mainstream media blowing it all over the front page, is because their agenda docket would have been impacted. And I mean that docket of the mainstream media and some of the people pushing that agenda that they were also promoting would have been exposed, and that would have been bad for the cause. So I have a sneaking suspicion that the media in this instance was being protective rather than exposing when it came to certain individuals.
Okay, interesting.
I think we should get an opportunity to see the list, but it'll come out.
Okay. Judge Joe Brown, thank you so much for coming on. I want to put a direct link to your X account so people can follow you. I also want to put a direct link to your barbecue sauce so that people can have the best barbecue sauce in America and support that. Is Amazon and your website still the best place?
Yes. If you go to the website, it's JJ. Oops. I've got a very self-important poodle around here. Anyway, it's jjbbbq.com. Judge Joe Brown, JJB, barbecue, BBQ.com. Go there and you can see the range of products. And if you go to Amazon, this Judge Joe Brown barbecue, and if you have Amazon Prime, you get free delivery and you'll get it in a couple of days. Problem is with all things these days, with inflation, the shipping costs more than a bottle of the sauce does if you get one bottle and order it online, though they have more products available. And if you want to get me on social media, I'm on X, and it's at Judge Joe Brown TV. Okay. I had a Facebook account, but I got permanently banned. I had the maximum number of friends, but I'd never posted anything. But they told me they were banning me because they did not like what I put on X, and they did not want me to make some of their people feel uncomfortable. So talking about free speech going out of the window, I thought that was extraordinary, but somebody needs to take them on because they do impact interstate commerce and communications. And that's how the civil rights laws get applied to everybody across the nation, is because if there's any impact, however slight, on interstate commerce or communications, all of those rights apply. So you got one poor guy who refused to make a wedding cake for a certain type of couple, and he wound up in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. You have one woman who refused to do a website, et cetera, in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. So if you got one little private individual, you sure as the devil have standing to bring in somebody that's got a few 100 million folk going through their venue when it comes to impacting interstate communications, wire communications to be specific, or broadcast, because they do need an FCC license. Otherwise, you couldn't pick it up through your cell phone or your computer. So somebody needs to take them on. I think our conservative media needs to get together and file some strategic and tactically sound lawsuits to get free speech restored to the modern means of communication. Social media is the modern soapbox.
Yeah.
And people stand on it to get their message heard by the crowd that gathers around. But if somebody says you can't do that, that's clearly unconstitutional because it's in the First Amendment. And if somebody says on the big scale, well, we run this, oh, forget that we have a license from the federal government. Forget this, that we have intruded ourselves in this mass impact on all of these people. Forget all of that. We don't want it heard because it's against our agenda. And one other thing to the conservative side, periodically, every broadcast station is going to have their license come up for renewal. Put in some challenges and give notice that you may get a bid together. And when you make these challenges, you'll start getting concessions from these stations, sometimes in writing, that they're going to revise their slanted, overly far left coverage of everything.
Okay, great. Well, I'll put those links down below. It's always good to see you and get your insight on what Trump's doing, big lawsuits. You've got such a great legal mind. Judge Joe Brown, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
2 thumbs up.
Thank you.